The different types of tinnitus and why symptoms vary so much. One of the most confusing aspects of tinnitus is how differently it shows up from person to person. Some people hear ringing, others hear buzzing or hissing, and the experience can change over time. In this episode, I'll explain the commonly discussed types of tinnitus and why symptoms can vary so widely based on how the auditory system and brain processes sound. Now, this content is for educational purposes only. When people first start looking into tinnitus, one of the most confusing things they discover is that there isn't just one single type. Tinnitus or tinnitus is often described as simply as ringing in the ears, but that description doesn't capture how varied the experience can actually be. In this episode, I want to explore the different ways tinnitus is commonly described, why symptoms can vary so much from person to person, and why understanding that variation can reduce some of the uncertainty that often comes with it. This is an educational discussion based on lived experiences and reputable information sources, not medical advice. One of the most basic distinctions often discussed is between subjective tinnitus and objective tinnitus. Subjective tinnitus is by far the most common type. It refers to sounds that only the individual can hear. There's no external sound source, and it can usually be detected by others. Objective tinnitus, which is much less common, refers to sounds that may have a physical source within the body, and in rare cases can sometimes be heard by a clinician during examination. For most people listening to this podcast, the experience will fall into the subjective category. Even within subjective tinnitus, though, the variation is enormous. Some people describe a high-pitched ringing, others hear buzzing, hissing, humming, clicking, roaring, or even a tone that seems to shift over time. The pitch can be steady or fluctuate. The volume can remain consistent or change from day to day. For some it's in one ear, for others both, and for some people it feels as though it's located more centrally, rather than clearly in one ear or the other. That diversity alone can make tinnitus feel unpredictable. Another important variation relates to duration and pattern. For some individuals, tinnitus is constant. The sound is there all the time, even if awareness of it changes. For others, it's intermittent. It may appear for hours or days and then reduce again. Some people experience temporary spikes where tinnitus feels louder or more intrusive, often linked to stress, fatigue, illness, or changes in the environment. Understanding that fluctuation is common can help reduce the instinct to interpret every change as something serious or permanent. There are also differences in how tinnitus interacts with other hearing experiences. Some people have tinnitus alongside measurable hearing loss. Others report tinnitus even when standard hearing tests appear mostly normal. There are some tinnitus changes with jaw movement or neck tension, which is sometimes described as somatic tinnitus. There are also people who notice tinnitus alongside sound sensitivity, sometimes referred to as hyperacusis. All this reinforces a simple truth. Tinnitus is not a single uniform condition. It's a broad term that describes a range of auditory perceptions. One of the reasons symptoms vary so much has to do with how sound is processed in the brain. Hearing is not just about the ears detecting sound waves, it involves complex neural processing, interpreting signals, filtering background noise, prioritizing certain inputs and adjusting sensitivity. Small differences in how individuals process sound can influence how tinnitus is perceived. That means two people with similar hearing histories might still describe very different tinnitus experiences. Another factor that contributes to variations is attention. As discussed in earlier episodes, attention plays a major role in how noticeable tinnitus feels. If somebody is under stress, fatigued or focusing on internal sensations, tinnitus can feel more prominent. When attention is outward, engaged in conversation, work or activity, tinnitus often fades into the background, even if the underlying signal hasn't changed. The dynamic nature of awareness can make tinnitus feel inconsistent, even when the sound itself is relatively stable. Emotional response also varies widely. Some people notice tinnitus and feel mild annoyance. Others feel anxiety or distress, especially early on. The reaction isn't about strength or resilience. It often relates to how unexpected the sound feels and how much uncertainty surrounds it. When something is unexplained, the brain tends to treat it as potentially important or threatening. Over time, as understanding improves, the emotional intensity can shift. That's another reason why two people with similar tinnitus sounds may report very different levels of impact. There's also variation in how tinnitus changes over time. For some it remains relatively steady for years. For others it evolves, changing pitch, intensity or pattern. Some people wrote that tinnitus becomes less intrusive as their brain becomes more familiar with it. This process isn't the same for everyone, and it doesn't follow a fixed timeline, but it's another reminder that tinnitus isn't static. It's also worth mentioning that external factors can influence perception. Sleep quality, stress levels, caffeine intake, illness, and even seasonal changes are sometimes reported to affect how noticeable tinnitus feels. That doesn't mean these factors cause tinnitus, but they can influence perception and awareness. Because tinnitus exists within a broader nervous system context, it doesn't operate in isolation. One challenge that arises from all this variation is comparison. People often go online searching for reassurance and encounter descriptions that don't match their own experience. If somebody reads about pulsatile tinnitus, tonal tinnitus, reactive tinnitus, or other subtypes, it can quickly become overwhelming. Understanding that tinnitus exists on a spectrum rather than neat categories can make that information feel less alarming. Another reason symptoms vary is that hearing history varies. Noise exposure, ear infections, medication history, age-related changes, and general health all differ between individuals. So it would actually be surprising if tinnitus felt identical for everyone. The variation reflects the individuality of hearing itself. One reassuring point is that variation does not automatically mean progression. If tinnitus changes in tone, pitch or intensity, it doesn't automatically mean something is deteriorating. Fluctuation is part of how perception works. That distinction can sometimes reduce some of the fear that often comes with noticing change. For many people, the most unsettling part of tinnitus isn't the sound, it's the unpredictability. Not knowing why it sounds different today than it did yesterday can feel destabilising. But when you understand that variability is common, that unpredictability becomes less mysterious, it becomes part of the broader pattern rather than an exception. Ultimately, tinnitus is less a single thing and more a range of experiences grouped under one name. Recognising that diversity can be empowering. It allows you to stop searching for a perfect comparison and instead understand your experience as one variation within a wide spectrum. In future episodes, I'll continue exploring related themes, including how tinnitus interacts with stress, sleep, attention and daily environments. As always, these discussions are educational and grounded in lived experiences rather than quick fixes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the David Health Podcast. If you'd like to follow future discussions, you can subscribe for upcoming episodes.